Welcome to the Accepted Authority podcast, where we help you solve a common growth challenge. I'm Andy Marmont, founder of Concurve, and as always, with me is Greg Rowith. G'day, Greg.
Hi, Andy. Looking forward to our chat today.
Absolutely, me too. So today what we wanted to do is talk about how to stay in control of the sales process. Something that you've identified this week, Greg, is a lot of your clients are having some challenges around losing control of the sales process, where they, I guess they're looking to book that next meeting, but there's some objections. And what happens is we're in sales limbo, or I like to call it the dance of sales, where no one's quite sure what's going on. So I'd love to explore that and just get a sense of what are the common objections that we're seeing, what are some strategies to overcome them, and then hopefully by the end we'll get a sense of some ways forward. So why don't we just start, Greg, with so I mean, why do you think it's such a challenge for a lot of consulting firm owners at the moment?
Yeah, well, yes, I think it's pretty common challenge for most sales people in that sales process, where they're getting held up and losing control. And it often comes about after a seemingly successful first meeting, an introduction meeting where everything seems to be right, all the boxes are being ticked, and there needs to be then an escalation of that relationship with a potential client, and maybe there are two or three other people who need to be involved in that conversation. So they go from let's book that appointment, but we need to coordinate times for people. So often it's like, well, here's 2 or 3 times that I'm available. Let's I'll put it into your hands to arrange at your end the people that are going to be involved, and and come back to me and book a time, and then nothing gets heard from that other party. And the time frames lapse, and it's like, where do you go from there? And you've lost control of that part of the process. So the temptation is, do I go back and look like I'm being pushy or maybe desperate? What's the next step? So there's a few ways around that, and that's not the only way of losing control of that process either. There are other pushbacks, I guess, where maybe the first meeting doesn't go exceptionally well, but there's a common ground. So someone says, well, send me some information. Usually that's the last you hear of them as well. So there's a real need to maintain control of that whole sales process. So having some strategies around that, and having a structure to the steps involved and setting up objective points of what you want to achieve. So, do you need 2 meetings? Do you need 3 meetings? Do you need 4 meetings? And what's the objective for each of those steps, and making sure that you've got a process where you're able to really keep control of what's happening in that process. So, the challenge of, getting, the second appointment booked is a big one. But there's some methodologies that we've used successfully around that. Perhaps you have as well, Andy.
Yeah, I think first of all, what comes to mind, Greg, is the framing. So your first meeting, there's got to be a really clear intention. You've got to have a time frame. I feel like by taking control of that initial meeting and saying whatever your spiel is, but it could be something along the lines of, really, I just want to find out a bit more about you and your business to see if we can help. Whatever that looks like for you. It's a 15-minute call, it's a 20-minute call. Again, have a time limit, and then really make it so there's a clear outcome. Is it a fit, or if it's not a fit? I mean, often that's a good way to start. So at least we all know it's not just a chat. It's not just a get to know you sort of call. Like it's a serious business meeting. So we need to have a sense of what the outcome is and why we're all here, because people's time is limited, it's valuable. I think that's the first thing that comes to mind. The second thing is, and something that you just alluded to there too, Greg, is when there's a bit of ambiguity over the next steps. I feel like quite often that seems to sometimes come from the prospect. Whereas if you framed the initial meeting correctly, then you're able to go and basically say, it's really up to me to decide if it's not a right fit or if it is. And if it's not, I'll tell you. And if it is, as the doctor, as the person who's prescribing whether there's an issue here, I'll let you know if it's available. And obviously there'll be some mutual agreement. But I find that if you make that call as well, and you're not afraid to sort of say, look, I don't think it's a fit, then your value in their eyes also immediately goes up, because they know that you're actually true to your word. You're not just trying to flog your product, but you're genuinely trying to assess if it's a right fit. I mean, what do you sort of feel, Greg, around that strategy?
Yeah, no, that's spot on. It's really about you setting the agenda for that process and, keeping control and being the authority in the process. You're not the servant, and we often get put into that servant role, particularly if the inquiry comes from the other party. As they are initiating contact. They think they have a problem and they want us to solve it. And sometimes that initial inquiry is about something they think they need. And I had this experience with one of my clients this week where a potential client called, had a chat and said, we need you to do some training for us. And the initial discussion my client felt, well, actually they don't need training. That's a surface level solution. They need a deeper diagnosis of what the real problems are, real issues which they're not really that aware of. They think some, training might solve the problem, but the client knows that's not going to be a long-term solution. So it's then having that courage, I guess, and the authority to be able to push back and say, well, no, for your benefit, I could take the money and run, but here's what I think is really necessary, and here's the next steps to go there, and really setting that agenda about what needs to happen next. So we need a meeting, and who are the other stakeholders that need to be involved in that, arranging some times. But often I find in that situation, and this is something that may preempt the process down the track, is avoiding the send me information by actually having information that you want to send them to educate them. And often when they're asking, send me more information, it's what's the information going to be about? And it's often like a brochure or a capability statement that gets sent out, really doesn't go anywhere. But having something specific relating to the problem, like an ebook or a video training or something like that you're able to say, here's some information I have about this particular problem that we want to address. Please make sure every one of the stakeholders consumes that information, and let's book a call. So why don't I come back, give you a week, or maybe we can set a tentative time. Let's book it in, and make sure that people have consumed that information. If we need to change that time, let's change it, but let's book it in, so we've got something to work around. And I think that way you have more control and more authority in the process as well.
It's interesting you say to send me something. I just want to pause on that objection, if you like, because I feel like an objection. I feel like if someone says, "Oh, can you just send me something?" it's actually a delaying tactic. What it really means, what they're really saying is, I'm not sure. So I want you to send something because it allows me to. I'm not really sure exactly what the problem that I have at the moment, and I'm not sure if you're the right answer. So if you send me something, that gives me a good couple of weeks, and it's a bit of ambiguity. So I would implore, and something I've learned is, I used this a couple of weeks ago. If someone's a prospect, it was a good call. I feel like it was a fit. And I said, listen, I think it's a fit. I suggest we do this. This is my next session. And she said, oh, can you send me something and I'll have a look at it. The first time in my career, I said no. And it felt weird, but I'll tell you why I said no. I said because I don't send it out all the time. The information that I have, I still need to go through and understand if it's the right fit, because I'm not just going to send something out for the sake of it if it's not going to be the right fit for you. And this is my reasoning, and we need to go through this a bit deeper. And then if it's the right fit, then I'll send you it as a sort of final step. And she agreed. And I feel like if I'd sent something, then there would be no control, is exactly what you pointed out, because it'd be like, well, I sent you something, but did you receive it? Which isn't obviously, I mean, that's the commission breath call, right? So you're sort of calling like, I just want to see if you want to go to the next step. But as part of your initial point around having that control, think about, based on your product, your service, what is the end result look like, and how much can you influence in these initial conversations? Really, if you're going to send something, it should, in my sense, I believe it's going to have more impact if it's essentially a final commercial element. Otherwise, you haven't done your job from a sales perspective to really qualify and get the prospect to see that is the clear pain point, and your solution addresses that, and you're the right and the best fit to be able to do that. So send me something. If you can kind of get around that and really understand, well, what do they mean by that? I feel like you're going to have some more success.
Yeah. Well, I think anytime the client asks you to send something, you've lost control, or you haven't done your job of getting them to the point where they're eager to move to the next step. And as you said, that's a delaying tactic from them. They're confused, but that's a polite way of saying, "Oh, I don't really know enough to make a decision yet." So they may or may not consume that. But when you've got control of the process, and I think particularly when you've had that initial call with one person, but then there are other stakeholders, often those other stakeholders aren't up to speed with the initial person. Maybe that first person who makes the inquiry has, they've felt a need, so they're reaching out first to see, if they can get help. They engage, in that conversation, and then they'll look at, okay, well, I need to, show my colleagues some reason to have a meeting. So if you're just putting that to them and say, well, our next step is to have a meeting with the others, you've got to empower that person to sell that meeting to the other stakeholders. So one of the ways that I've successfully achieved that is having that content that's problem specific. So, ideally you've already, got that as part of your marketing arsenal, or marketing assets, if you like, where that your ideal clients are calling about a specific problem. So you can address that with content you already have. But if you do have to create it specifically for this purpose, then that's beneficial as well. You'll be able to use that again later. But so taking that step to make sure that the other stakeholders see the benefits of having that next conversation, because you're addressing a problem that they all recognize then and see that you've got some solutions to it. So then they're more likely to set a time, because I think often what happens is the initial initiator of the conversation goes to the other parties and says, here's what I want to do. And they said, no, we don't need that, or no, I can't see any benefit. And it just goes nowhere. And they're embarrassed to come back and say, oh, sorry, we're not going anywhere. And so just, you're waiting and waiting, unless you then go and say, well, what's happening with the meeting? So it gets embarrassing. So being in control of that conversation and really being clear, what are your objectives? Step one, what do you have to do to create the environment for the next step to go ahead successfully, and really initiate that yourself. So you are actually really controlling the flow.
Yes, I think that's a great summation of how to keep control of its sales process, because the better that we can overcome some of these objections and actually understand that your process isn't simply about making the sale, but you've got to have a robust approach to qualify and really assess a number of different prospective clients if they are the right fit, and you have your own process to do that. But you're right, like how do you then ensure that there is an outcome, because you don't want to be thinking that I've got all these different leads, where are they in the pipeline? Like, am I wasting my time? There's nothing worse than saying, I've got 5 leads and I've had meetings with them, but I don't know if they're interested. I've tried them and no one wants to go through that process. So I think you've done really well, Greg, in sort of going through that. In our next podcast episode, what we're going to do is we're going to talk as an extension to this around how do we nurture our potential clients. Maybe we've had a meeting with them. Maybe we've got to a certain stage and they're not quite ready, they're not quite interested. How do we nurture them in the way that's not salesy, but keeps us top of mind as the authority, and ultimately leads to more conversations and more quality sales? So we'll go through that. But in the meantime, Greg, where can we find you if we want to know some more information about you?
Yes, well, LinkedIn's a great place to find me. Just do a search for Greg Roworth and I'll come up pretty quickly. Otherwise, go to my website at businessflightpath.com.
Awesome. You can find me at LinkedIn at Andy Marmont or concurve.com.au. This has been the Accepted Authority podcast. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.